Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Petra Mortimer with Generations Health. Thank you so much for joining us for our caregiver program today, Learning Your Loved One's New Language, Mastering Dementia Fluency, presented by Jennifer FitzPatrick. We are so grateful to have Ingleside sponsoring today's program, and in just a moment, I'm going to invite them to join us. But first, there are a few things I want to go over with you. Everyone is muted to eliminate any background noise. However, this is an interactive program, so please feel free to ask any questions, answer questions, or if you have any comments on the discussion that is taking place. To do this, you can utilize the chat feature. As a reminder, to find the chat, you can scroll over the bottom of your screen and there you'll see a banner that pops up. On the banner, there's a bubble that says chat. When you click on that, the chat feature will launch and will most likely show up on the right-hand side of your screen. When you use chat, your questions, comments, answers will only be seen by our sponsor, our presenter, and myself. This is simply for Jennifer. This is simply for privacy reasons, and Jennifer is great about keeping an eye on the chat to answer your questions. As I mentioned, we're so grateful to have Ingleside for today's program. At this time, to share a little more information with you, I'd like to invite Kirsten Parsons.
Thank you so much, Petra. So I just want to introduce each of you to Ingleside. Many of you may be familiar with us or a specific facet of what we do. I want to just let you know that Ingleside is a not-for-profit organization. We have 3 communities, one in DC, one in Maryland, and one in Virginia. We are life plan communities. A term that's also used is continuing care retirement communities. What this means is that we have independent living, assisted living, and skilled nursing all on one campus. I am your point of contact specifically for our assisted living level of care. That's where I specialize, and that's where our traditional assisted living and our memory support assisted living neighborhoods are and what I represent and can answer your questions about. I do want to just introduce our communities to you. Again, our flagship community, Ingleside at Rock Creek in Northwest DC. And if you are taking any notes, if you're a care manager on this call, I just want to let you know where we do have some availabilities is in our memory support neighborhood. We've opened our second one in December, which is wonderful to be able to welcome new families and new residents after being full for quite a while in our first neighborhood. So that's at Ingleside at Rock Creek, currently accepting applications for our memory support. At Westminster at Lake Ridge, we have our assisted living. I believe we have one more apartment. So if you've got something urgent there, please do give me a call afterwards for our traditional assisted living. And then at Ingleside at King Farm, I do have availability in our traditional assisted living and our memory support assisted living. Ingleside at King Farm is our sister community in Rockville, Maryland. I do want to let you know about an opportunity we have to be able to serve your loved one or your client for a short-term period. So if there is some travel that's going to be going on and you want them to be in a secured environment with 24/7 staff, we do offer a respite program. So this is a 30-day period where they can be in our community. I can share more information with you about this program. It's based on availability. So again, as I have an apartment available that I can use this for, I would love to speak to you about this opportunity. And then I want to make you all aware of our next educational event. We will be with Jennifer next month, April 7th at 2 p.m. We'll be talking specifically about Alzheimer's disease. So I will also share the link to register for this in the chat. My contact information for you, you're welcome to text or call me. That's a cell phone. If that's easier for you, certainly email as well. I look forward to corresponding with each and every one of you. Thank you so much. And Jennifer, I turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. We're about to get started with Jennifer, but I would like to give you a little information about her first. Our presenter today is the author of Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One, and a longtime gerontology instructor at Johns Hopkins University's Certificate on Aging program. She is one of less than 800 certified speaking professionals worldwide and has been featured in national media such as The Wall Street Journal, Reader's Digest, Sirius XM, CBS, ABC, and many more. When she's not working, she spends her time as a below average first mate on her boat. Please join me in welcoming from Kent Island, Maryland, Jennifer L. FitzPatrick, MSW, LCSW-C, CSP.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. And thank you so much again to Kirsten and the team at Ingleside for putting this on. Please, as Petra mentioned, this next hour is about you. And if you have comments, if you have questions, please write them in the chat section. We want you to get your answers that you need to better serve your loved one. So we are going to jump into becoming fluent in the language of dementia, learning your loved one's new language. Your loved one is dealing with loss of words and loss of phrases, but also skills. Your loved one has a new language since they have a dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's, whether it's Lewy body, frontotemporal, vascular, and this new language will probably become a little newer every year. And the more time that goes on, the harder time they're going to have understanding you, and the harder time that you're likely going to have understanding them. And that's not just in terms of words and phrases, vocabulary, but tone of voice, the way that they respond to a question, what they're able to do as far as skills go, things that we might take for granted. So it's very important for us to prep as much as possible so we can meet them where they are. We want to keep emphasizing and remind yourself every single day that it is not your loved one's fault that they have a new language. It is the dementia's fault. And most people tend to realize and recognize, and they can come to terms with the fact that their loved one's memory isn't quite what it once was. So maybe they forget what season it is, or maybe they forget that they watched their favorite movie last night, or that they just had a salad for lunch. Maybe a lot of us have an easier time saying, okay, this is awful, this is hard, but I understand that happens. It's very much associated with dementia, but the pieces with communication and language aren't as much. When we ask a question and we say, would you like a glass of water? And they say baseball, that can be jarring. When we think, well, how hard would it be? Yesterday, she was able to say, I would like a glass of water. I'd like a glass of juice. But there are going to be moments where that person really, really struggles with those communication skills and not just with their memory. And again, that gets worse as time goes on. Also, the physical body, the way that somebody might be able to communicate with their physical body, maybe nodding, maybe shaking their head no, maybe the facial expression that they make when they're trying to tell you something. I'm sure that many of you, especially if it's somebody that you've known a long time, maybe it's your mom, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's your sister, and they have facial expressions that you've come to know over a lifetime. Feel free to write in if you've got a relationship like that, and now suddenly the facial expressions aren't what they once were. So maybe there was a facial expression that you could tell on your husband's face that he was hungry or he was tired, and now it doesn't seem like he can communicate that way, the way that he once did, or if he was irritated by something, you may or may not be able to see that on his face anymore, on his physical body. And then, of course, in addition to that, what that person's able to do is getting more limited as time goes on, in terms of dressing themselves, in terms of feeding themselves, in terms of anything that has to do with taking care of themselves, or moving from a chair to a standing position. All of that is diminished, and it is the dementia's fault. So, of course, Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. And there are other types of Lewy body, frontotemporal, vascular dementia. I think it's very helpful to look at, because from all the dementias, we all experience some of these A's. Now, the amnesia is the one that most of us tend to think about when we think about dementia. And we know, again, most people, even lay people who've never had a loved one who has dementia, they recognize, okay, well, that person might forget that it was Thanksgiving last week, or that person might forget that their great granddaughter is having a baby, or that their husband is sick, or something like that. But the rest of it is lesser known. And so I just wanted to share these. We see a lot of the aphasic issues with can't use words, don't understand words and phrases. The agnosia can't figure out that they have to go to the bathroom, or that they're hungry, or that they're tired. The apraxia, again, we talked about losing some control over the body movements. Your loved one can't choose to use the language that you and I use. You and I can use shorthand, and we can use facial expression, and we can write, and we have a lot of options on how we want to get our messaging across. But as your loved one's disease progresses, they have less and less options. So it's our job, always our job, to be the one to adapt and to try to understand their new language, the new language that they are dealing with. They don't have a choice. I'm guessing that there's a lot of you out there. Feel free to write in what you've experienced. If you have any feelings about this, write in the chat section that you have to be the one to adapt. If anybody would like to write in their thoughts or feelings about that adapting, how do you feel? Does that feel difficult? Does that feel challenging? Does that sometimes feel impossible? If you are caregiving, whether you have your loved one living in your home with you, or if they're living in a community like in Ingleside, there's different challenges associated with having to adapt. Some families completely resist adapting, and they just think, well, if I try hard enough, or if I repeat enough, my mom is going to be able to respond to me properly. If I ask her over and over and over again, what does she want to have for dinner? She's ultimately going to be able to respond to me properly and not say trees. She'll tell me, she'll say spaghetti, she'll say chicken, but we really do have to be the ones to adapt. And we have to know that there are going to be moments where your loved one is just like you and I, that you're going to ask them what they want for dinner, and they're going to be able to say, I feel like having pasta. And that's a great day. That's a great moment. But a lot of it is going to be moments. And again, as the disease progresses, more and more moments where are they less like us, and they're less like us and more struggling, more having a difficult time using the language that you and I are accustomed to. I liken in my book, Cruising Through Caregiving, and if you would like to download the worksheets and a free chapter of the book, if you could just go to cruisingthroughcaregiving.com, you can download that all for free. I liken learning the language of your loved one who has dementia, like getting around a foreign country, And so you may recognize some of the flags here. The first flag you see is Ireland, and the second flag you see is Italy, and the third one is Yemen. And I liken the three flags is to going and trying to navigate the foreign country without having done any prep. So I liken Ireland to the early stages of a dementia, Italy to the mid stages, and Yemen to the late stages. So let's dig in a little deeper. So if we go to Ireland, if I put you on a plane to Ireland this afternoon and you haven't done any preparation, it's a big surprise trip. You're going over to Ireland. Maybe you've always wanted to go and you've never had the opportunity. And you get on a plane and you get over to Ireland and you did not prepare. You didn't know about it. You didn't research Ireland. You're going to get over there and it's going to be all right, because Ireland has a lot in common with the United States. Ireland, they speak English. Yes, they speak some Gaelic, but for the most part, Ireland is going to be not so unfamiliar. They probably drink more Guinness than us. It's greener than the US, but you're going to see food that looks familiar. Body language and gesturing is going to be familiar. A lot of customs are familiar. Social graces are very similar. So you're going to be just fine. You probably would have a little bit more fun and have a little bit of a better time and maybe enjoy yourself more if you researched a little bit about the country before you went, but you're going to be just fine. But I liken this to if your loved one is in the early stages of a dementia, for example, Alzheimer's disease. So in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, we are experiencing a lot of small memory lapses and a lot of small issues around communication. And so I might say to my mother, remember, we have to go to the doctor. And she says, no, we don't. And I say, yes, we do. And she says, oh, that's right. So sometimes doing a little, what a lot of us in this field call reality orientation can work in those early stages. But of course, there's going to be moments where that reality orientation doesn't work. But again, a lot of the day, your loved one in the early stages of dementia are a lot like you and I. And in fact, there are people that still have jobs that have early stages of dementia, that still are out there driving, that you bump into maybe in a grocery store and you don't even realize that they have dementia. That does happen. I'm going to tell you a story about when I was in a conference center a while back, a couple of years ago, where I was getting ready to do my presentation, and there was a big screen up in the conference center, and it had my name on it, and it had the title of the presentation, much like what you saw when you joined this program this afternoon. And there was a woman in the audience, a very well-dressed woman, and she called me over, and she was very well-spoken, and she said, excuse me, your name is FitzPatrick. And I said, yeah, I'm Jennifer FitzPatrick. I'm the presenter today. How are you? And we talked for a few moments, and she said, do you know, and she told me the name of a friend of hers who also had the last name FitzPatrick. And I said, oh no, it's actually my husband's name. And FitzPatrick is pretty common. There's a lot of Fitzpatricks out there. So I don't think I know your friend, but we chatted, and I said, well, I better get back up to the stage. They're going to start me soon. Well, after my presentation, I went walking through the audience. I was talking to different people, shaking hands with different people. And this same woman called me over. What do you think she said to me? She said, because on the last slide, it said my name, Jennifer FitzPatrick. And on that last slide, she pointed to it. She says, your name's FitzPatrick. And I said, yes. And she said, and she told me the whole same exact story again. She was actually there with her husband who was taking care of her. And this was a class very similar to this class about dementia caregiving. And she, thankfully I knew how to handle it. And I just said, yep, absolutely. I went through the same motions with her again. And I said to her, yeah, no, FitzPatrick's a really common name. Now, I'm saying this to you because I've been working with people with dementia for over 30 years. I had no idea. I met this woman. She looked just like you and I. And she was in the audience, and she was well-spoken, but I'm guessing that she maybe has moments of clarity during the day where she wouldn't have asked that question twice, and we wouldn't have had that same conversation. But yeah, she was there with her husband. And I think it's really important to remember that in those early stages, the person can sound a lot like us and look a lot like us. But in the mid stage, it's different. The mid stage is a little trickier. So let's say if I send you to Ireland with no prep, I put you on a plane to Rome, and then from Rome, you go to one of the more rural areas of I'm sorry, did I say Italy? Italy. I'm sending you to Italy with no prep. I send you on a plane to Rome, and then from Rome, you're going to go to a rural section of Italy. And if you haven't prepped to go to, say, a rural section of Italy, maybe Assisi, for example, and you're in Assisi, where I have actually been, and they don't speak a lot of English. Not a lot of English is spoken there. Some people do, but not many. And you're in this village and in this lovely area, and you are trying to navigate, but you haven't read the Rick Steves books, you haven't downloaded an app for Italian to English on your phone or English to Italian, and you haven't really read anything about the area or customs or anything like that, and you find yourself doing okay, but struggling a little bit because you don't speak Italian. But not to fear, not all is lost, because you're probably seeing a lot that's familiar. So for one, you're seeing food that's familiar. Everybody's probably eaten Italian food before. You're smelling smells that are familiar. But you're also, if you took a Romance language like Spanish or French or something like that in school, you're probably picking up words here and there, which is wonderful. But you're not going to be able to carry on a full conversation. And so you're probably going to be gesturing a lot and using your facial expressions to express what you need, your questions. If you want a glass of water, you might be lifting your hands up. If you need to use the phone, you might be lifting your hands up. If you want to check, you might be writing in the air. So there's a lot of gesturing. But again, the social customs there's some overlap with Italy, but you're going to be okay. It's not that foreign. It's foreign, but it's not that foreign. And this is what I liken to taking care of somebody who has dementia or trying to communicate with somebody in the mid stages, because you're going to have a lot more moments where they are not themselves, that they are really, really struggling, that you're saying to them, you can't leave the house, it's snowing, it's icy outside, and they continue to walk out. And when you go to the bathroom, they're out that front door. And so if you haven't prepped, or if you don't understand this, or if you haven't figured out that trying to reality orient your loved one in the mid stages probably isn't a good idea, you're going to really, really struggle. And your loved one is going to really struggle. So let's go to the last stage. And I liken visiting Yemen without prep. I liken that very much to the late stages of a dementia. So if I put you on a plane to Yemen tonight and you have not prepped, you are going to be in big trouble because they speak Arabic. You're probably going to have challenges getting around without speaking Arabic, a lot of challenges. But more than that, the dress code is different. Women have different rights than men do. The social customs are quite different. Certain gesturing might be considered very, very offensive. If you're not going to be able to read, you're probably not going to pick up words unless you took Arabic in high school, which most people did not. So unless you've read a lot about going to Yemen and you've studied and you've learned and you've prepared yourself, you're going to have a tough time, a really, really tough time. And this is what I liken the late stages of dementia care to. Because if you're taking care of somebody in the late stages, their ability to communicate with you is very, very limited. It is nearly non-existent, at least verbally. Now, they can navigate communicating with you by sometimes noises, facial expressions, touch. What do I mean by that? So if your loved one is in the late stages and they're not able to talk anymore, which happens to most people in the late stages, they might have a couple of words left, but not very much. And they are unable to talk to you. You have to try to be a detective to find out what your loved one needs. What do they want? Are they tired? Are they hungry? Do they want to be left alone? Do they want to listen to music? And this is really hard. And so if you're thrust and you haven't planned and you haven't prepared, communicating and speaking that language and getting the needs met for your loved one who is really in that Yemen stage is really, really tough. So I want to invite everybody to please feel free to write in comments, questions. I'm here to answer anything that I can. And I know Kirsten and the team at Ingleside would love to hear your questions. Also, if you have anything, if you want to be specific and tell us what's going on with your loved one, if you have any questions about stages or communication, and we'll continue, but feel free at any point to write in. So the early stages, Ireland, the mid stages, Italy, and the final late stage is Yemen. So other mistakes that we might make when visiting a foreign country. Maybe we forget where our passport is, or we don't have our boarding pass or our ticket. This is going to be something that we see a lot of when we are working and loving and trying to communicate with somebody in our life who has an irreversible dementia diagnosis. We're going to make mistakes that we're going to maybe have that assumption that if they get in the car to go with us to the store or to the doctor's office, that they're going to bring their purse. If you have a parent that maybe still lives alone and they're in the early stages and you pick them up at their home and you didn't say, Mom, did you bring your insurance card? Did you bring your wallet? That might be something that is an issue. And or if you didn't observe that she didn't have her wallet and her insurance card with her. So think about the areas where maybe we're not communicating enough. Now, if somebody is in the mid stages, it might be that we completely bypass asking the question, but that we as the loved one make sure that we have those items with us so that everything goes smoothly at the doctor. So sometimes not communicating is actually preferred. So Ken says, how or when do you prepare for the Yemen stage of communication? How do I talk to my spouse about this stage? So I'm going to ask a clarifying question to Ken. Ken, does your spouse, what stage is your spouse in right now? So I'm going to let Ken write that in, just so I'm making sure that I answer you appropriately. So Ken's question is, when do you prepare for the Yemen stage of communication? How do you talk to your spouse about this stage? So I'm going to wait for Ken to give us a little bit more information about where he feels that his spouse is currently. Early, middle, or do you feel like your spouse is already in the late stages? Not dressing properly for the weather is another example. When we go to a foreign country, or I will just give you an example. Even when I went to Florida recently, and it wasn't even a foreign country. I left Maryland to go to Florida. And I just always make the assumption it's going to be warm in Florida. I don't know if anybody here does that. Oh, it's going to be nicer than here. Well, there was a day in Florida when we were down there that was exactly the same temperature that it was here. And we were freezing because we didn't bring any jeans. We didn't bring any sweatshirts or anything like that. And so we all probably have made mistakes when we've packed. So in terms of when we're communicating with our loved one, the same idea are we assuming that our loved one is going to know what they need for maybe a visit to a grandparent or a grandchild's house, or maybe to go outside, or even if that person's in, say, the mid stages, and we say, oh, make sure that you dress well for the weather, are they going to remember and understand exactly what that means? Or is it better if we don't actually use verbal communication, but we do cueing? We help them pack or put clothing out that's going to be appropriate for that weather. Okay, so Ken's saying, that he thinks that his wife is likely in late Ireland, early Italy, so late early stages, early mid stages. And she does follow your instructions. So Ken, I would say, this is just my professional opinion, I wouldn't try to prepare your wife for the late stages, because it's very scary and it's very upsetting, and it's probably going to give her a very strong, upsetting reaction. I think what I would say is to prepare yourself for that stage and know, and anybody in your caregiving crew, which I call the team, your family, your friends, whoever's helping to take care of your wife, that you all need to prepare. Your wife, you can have this conversation with her today. Hey, it's probably going to get to a point, if you live long enough with this disease, if something else, you don't pass away from another condition, that you're not going to be able to speak verbally. That would probably be very devastating if she's able to internalize that and understand what you're saying. So I don't know that I would even discuss it, but what I would do is I would try to be really just mindful of watching her body language, watching what kind of gesturing, what kind of facial expressions does she make when she's hungry, when she's tired, at the moments when she's not able to talk to you. How is she telling you what she wants and what she needs? And I think that that's what everybody in your friend family network or professional network, whether you're working with home care aides or you're working with a community like Ingleside, that all of those folks should be doing. I think it's a matter of just doing the best you can to anticipate. And the other piece of that, Ken, is making sure that when you get to the late stages, that you absolutely are not doing it by yourself. I don't think any one caregiver should do any level of caregiving alone. It's too much for one person when somebody has dementia. But at the late stages, your loved one, your wife, is going to have a lot of physical limitations. It's going to be really hard for her to stand up or get dressed or brush her teeth. And so it's time now, if you think she's in the late early stages or the early mid stages, now's the time to be looking at what other kind of help do I need? Should I be touring in Ingleside? Should I be looking at adult day? Should I be looking at home care? Do I want to talk to people in my faith community to help us? Because it's probably going to be a lot more, not just psychologically and cognitively taxing, but physically taxing too. But my recommendation would be not to necessarily have that conversation with her, but just to educate yourself and just try to observe and watch how she's communicating with you. Sometimes people will use certain words in place of other words. So they might, when they mean phone, they might say pen, or there's a certain tone of voice that they use when they're making a sound. So that would be my advice to you, Ken. So Joyce says, you mentioned our loved one's reality. In what country does reality change? My loved one seems to be between Italy and Yemen. It seems to upset my loved one when I try to connect. So Joyce, it's different for everybody. And I know everyone hates hearing that, but it really is the truth. Reality starts to change for people in the early stages. They have moments where, so the way I like to put it is there's in the Ireland stage, they have a lot of moments like us, but then a little bit of moments that they're not like us. In the Italy stage, they have kind of like half and half, almost half they're like us and sort of half that they are very different from us. And then in the Yemen stage, it's almost exclusively they're not like us anymore. So yeah, the reality is slowly changing. And so Joyce, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. You say, it seems to upset my loved one when I try to connect. Can you tell me what you're trying to do to connect? Because that might help me to figure out, or help you figure out, why she or he seems upset. And if you can give me a definition of what you said, the person seems upset, what does that mean? So what are you doing to try to connect? And why do they seem upset? What are they doing that shows you that that loved one is upset? So not making reservations, not planning ahead. So we make those mistakes sometimes. We don't make reservations ahead of time. We pay too much. This is not doing the pre-planning, not doing the looking at the resources, the reading the books, the 36-hour day, the validation breakthrough. There's so many wonderful books about dementia. Going to the Alzheimer's Association's website and taking some of their classes. This is some of the prep you can do to make your voyage, your journey, your trip on the road to dementia, to make it a little bit less stressful. again, when we don't make the effort to understand something about the culture and the custom when we go to another country, we're having a harder time. And this is what I want to invite everybody to do. You want to make the effort to learn. And the fact that you are here today is huge. The fact that you came to this event and that you're trying to connect with Ingleside and the other family caregivers that are on and learn and ask questions, this is huge, because your loved one's new language and the way that they're expressing themselves, it's very much like visiting a foreign country's culture and customs. And when you understand it, it's going to be less stressful for you and it's going to be less stressful for them. Okay, so Joyce says, for example, when she thinks someone's in the house and I take her through the house, she's afraid, gets more afraid because she thinks they're hiding. You take her through the house to show her no one's there. All right, that's a really common thing, Joyce. So you're trying to show her. So for some people that works. Let me show you that there's nobody here. But unfortunately in her brain, you can't convince her. What our instinct is, for most people who don't have dementia, who your brain is thinking properly, you're thinking normally, okay? You don't have a diseased brain. You're thinking, look, if I take her to the window and I show her, no, Mom, it's not snowing, she's going to understand it's not snowing. But guess what? She might be seeing snow and feeling snow. Hallucinations and delusions, we can't tell what's going on in their brain. And so they might actually feel cold when it's not. They might think they hear somebody when no one's hiding. So I think one of the things, so that's one thing you can try. You can try that, and we call that reality orientation. But when you try it and it's not working and she gets more afraid, I think you got to pivot and try something else and course correct. And so if anybody wants to write in some examples for Joyce that they think can help de-escalate her loved one, that would be great. What do you think would be something else that you can try with this person that Joyce loves, who gets scared because she thinks there's somebody hiding in the house? Feel free to write in. And if nobody writes in, I'm going to give some ideas, but let's hang on and see if anybody writes in what they've done. Not pacing yourself. So a lot of people, when they go to visit a foreign country, they try to see everything in the same day, and they get exhausted and they're overwhelmed. They come home, they feel like, I didn't even relax. That wasn't that much fun. And so I think it's the same idea when you're trying to adjust to your loved one's new country. You got to pace yourself. Don't beat yourself up. It's going to take you time. You will make mistakes. And I can tell you that I still make mistakes. When I'm around somebody who has dementia, I still make mistakes. I started working in this field when I was 16 years old. And there are moments where I say the wrong thing. But here's the deal. As sad as that is, and as hard as it is, and the person might have a poor reaction, you always have a second chance, because you can take a moment, take a breath, and say, I'm going to try again. You walk away, and the next time they say there's a burglar in the house, you can try something new. So no one's written in any suggestions. So I'm going to go ahead, and if anybody wants to write in any other thoughts. Oh, we got somebody writing. So let's see if there's, okay. Yeah, Kirsten from Ingleside says, Joyce, are you familiar with the validation method? If not, I can send you the recording from our educational event last month. And empathy, validating your mom is scared. I think Naomi File's book, The Validation Breakthrough, is a really good one. And Petra, if you could put that in the chat section. But Kirsten, I think that's a great offer to send that. Joyce is saying she's not aware of that method, but it's about not being reality oriented. I think those of us who are really logical, Validation Breakthrough, Petra, by Naomi File, F-E-I-L. So I think a lot of us are like, okay, let's just be logical. Let's show her that there's nobody in the house. Let's show her that it's not snowing. Let's show her that here's your wallet, all your money's in it. And that works for a lot of us who are logical. All right, no, you're right. I looked out the window, it's not snowing. I looked under the bed, there's nobody hiding. But because the brain is degenerating, the brain is really essentially broken. What you want to try to address is the feeling of fear. And the other thing that I want to say, so trying to say, oh, you're safe, I'm going to stay with you, I know it's scary. It's really a wonderful way to empathize and can be very de-escalating. But the other thing, Joyce, that I want to say is that for a lot of people, and this doesn't work all the time for everybody, but for a lot of people, having being engaged in activity can help with hallucinations and delusions. In fact, there are studies that indicate that when we are isolated and lonely, if you have dementia, you're going to have more hallucinations and delusions. And what that really means is when you've got somebody who has dementia, I'm going to use the example of the private home. When someone lives at home, because this is where I think it happens more commonly. The person's in their house, in their apartment, in their condo, and they're sitting on a rocking chair, and maybe they have the newspaper in their hand, the TV's on, and there's apathy. But when somebody sits down and you put on an old movie that they like, or you put on music that they like, that's in their long-term memory, and you dance together, or you take a walk outside, or you go to a garden, you go outside and you garden together. Just because somebody can't verbally speak, especially in the mid stages, that doesn't mean somebody can't go out for a boat ride, or can't sit outside and garden, or can't dance. A lot of people, they are able to do those things. So I would say, consider, is your loved one not engaged in activity? And if she is not, or he is not, what can you do to make sure that he or she is? Whether that's a family member, whether that's friends, whether that's hired help coming into the home, whether you're bringing her to a community like in Ingleside, whether you're utilizing adult day. But the more that person is sort of bored, it's like that idle mind, right? The idle mind is hallucinating and deluded. Now, that's not to say that people who engage in activities never have delusions and hallucinations, because they do. But these are some ways to help minimize and prevent. And I think you generally, people who are engaged in some activities during the day are going to sleep better, wander less. So some mistakes that we make is reality orientation after the later stages. So what do I mean by that? So in the early stages of a dementia diagnosis, when someone is very early on and they say, hey, is President Reagan is the president? What do you think's going on with his policies? And we might say to him or her, actually, it's been a while since Reagan's been president. We can try that. And a lot of times in the early stages, in the Ireland stages, they're going to say, oh, yeah, you're right. Okay. And they say, oh, Biden is the president. But if you do that and the person doesn't respond positively, and they fight with you, or they yell at you, or they get mad, or their facial expressions crunch up, you want to pivot. And so I always say you can try reality orientation anytime you want, but especially after the early stages, you got to pivot quickly if it doesn't go well, because you're dealing with somebody whose impulse control is very limited. They can yell, they can get angry, they can even hit. People who have never, ever been confrontational or angry or violent have, because of what's going on with their brain, this can happen sometimes. And sometimes it's our fault. Now, no caregiver, no loved one deserves to be yelled at or hit. I'm not suggesting that, but we do have the power to de-escalate. Remember, we want to join their country. They can't stay in ours. We're correcting. No, there's not somebody under your bed. Again, you can try it, but if they say they don't believe you the first time, I would course correct. I'd try something else. Negative body language. They're reading all of your body language. They're reading whether you're smiling or you're frowning. They're reading whether your face is crunched up and thinking. I have to be super careful about that when I'm with somebody who has dementia. I've been told when I think or when I'm concentrating that I look angry and I'm really just like focusing and thinking. And we just want to just be mindful as much as possible. What is our body language saying? If we have our arms crossed, it could be because you're cold, but your loved one might look like, oh gosh, she's mad at me. Not knowing your individual loved one. Now, this is more of an issue for people that don't know your loved one. Now, if you know your loved one for a long time, you know who they were before they had dementia. And a lot of that's going to be very useful, but sometimes you are going to be shocked by how much they change. And so I know people that say, oh, my mother hates music, or my mother always hated going outside. And she's an indoor person. And now that she has dementia, things have changed a little bit. So be flexible in getting to know who your loved one is now. Raising your voice is generally not going to be helpful unless your loved one is hearing impaired. I think sometimes people think if they yell something that it's going to get through more, but really be mindful of your tone of voice. Is it gentle? Is it kind? You want to speak so you're projecting and so your loved one can hear what you're saying, but be careful about being too loud. Big mistake is expecting your loved one to be like us. They are in a foreign country now. Using only verbal strategies. It might be that your loved one is your spouse, used to be your best friend you told everything to, or your parent or your sister, and you had great conversations. You've got to understand that that is not gonna work the way it once did. Them using only verbal strategies, you speaking to them only is going to be not helpful. They are going to communicate better with touch, with facial expressions. Having long conversations might not be what is going to be good for them anymore. And so I know your loved one is not replaceable. I'm not saying that they are, but you've got to get that need met. If this was somebody that confided in you or gave you great advice, you got to find other ways to get that need met for yourself, because this person probably isn't going to be that person for you anymore. We've got to use their language. We have to make the effort. Remember, your loved one is not going to be able to reason most of the time. A lot of their language in this new country that they're living in is going to be more childlike, even though he or she is an adult. Two dudes watching football. So I want to give you the example of my husband and his friend Bill going out to watch a football game one day. And my husband, before he went out to see the football game with Bill had, I guess, in the last month before they went to see this football game, recently had broken up with his girlfriend. And so when my husband, Sean, came home from watching the game with Bill, I said, hey, how's he doing? And he's like, oh, great. What do you mean? And I said, how's he doing about the breakup? And he says, we didn't talk about the breakup. And I said, what do you mean you didn't talk about the breakup? And I said, what did you do? And he said, we watched the football game. Okay. I said, well, what else did you talk about? He's like, nothing much. We just talked about the football game and hung out. And the point I'm trying to make, no matter what gender the person is who has the dementia and what gender or gender identity that the person has who is the family caregiver, I want you to try to think about two dudes watching football. Now, I'm not suggesting that all men are like this. But I'm giving you the example of my husband and his friend because that conversation about the breakup wasn't welcome. The way that these two dudes connect with one another is doing something together, watching football, maybe listening to a concert, maybe playing golf, maybe going out on the boat together. Having a deep conversation was not on the agenda that day. And I think for a lot of us, again, doesn't matter the gender of either person, but maybe it's two brothers who always had these really great deep conversations, and now your brother can't do that anymore. You can't ask his business advice. He was a great business person. You want to talk to him about business. Maybe it's time to just put on a football game. Maybe it's time to take your brother for a walk. Maybe it's time to get out art supplies and do art with your brother. Maybe it's time to put on an old movie that he enjoys. Just be together. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. Using cues. What do we want that person to do? Cueing, modeling, picking up the fork, saying, oh, time to eat, without the cue, a lot of times is going to be a miss, especially for somebody in Italy or Yemen. Use touch. Touch is a lot of times how this person can express themselves. When they pull you toward them, when they push you away. When my grandfather was dying of cancer, he was able to tell us if he wanted us to leave the room, if he wanted peace and quiet. With my great grandmother-in-law, when she was dying, I remember she would just turn her head, and she did not have Alzheimer's, but her cognition was not great at the end of life for a variety of reasons. And she was showing us verbally or non-verbally, but also if she wanted us to come closer, she would pull us closer. When we came to her bedside, she'd pull on our hands. And so when my grandfather had cancer versus when somebody has some cognitive issues late in life, later as they're in the Yemen stage, or if they have other conditions, using touch is going to be how they're going to communicate. Approach your loved one from the front. Don't sneak up on them. Smile, make good eye contact, especially if you haven't seen your loved one in a couple days or a couple weeks or maybe a couple months. Or even if you just were in the other room for an hour, reconnect, smile, and make eye contact before you get into their personal space. Be a detective about what's going on with them. Unfortunately, they're not going to be able to tell you all the time. They're not going to be able to say, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm scared. Consider therapeutic fibbing. Sometimes, and this is another one to share with Joyce, and some people will try this and it works. Saying to your loved one, I called the police, let's go in the other room or let's go outside for a walk and until the police clear the place. It doesn't work for everybody. Not every family is comfortable with it, but it's something to consider. We talked about validation and the Naomi File model. Don't argue with your loved one. You're not going to win. You're going to get worked up. They're going to get worked up. It's never going to be productive. And I love this acronym. We've talked about the smiling, but having open posture, leaning in, being mindful of their personal space, their territory, eye contact, and nodding. There's a lot of ways to be dementia fluent, but don't lose sight of how is it benefiting your loved one? How is it making their experience less stressful and your experience less stressful? So I want to open it up for any more questions or comments. We do have a few moments left, but in the meantime, Petra, if you would put not only the Cruising Through Caregiving, you can download those worksheets in the chapter if you would like, but also she's got an evaluation that we would welcome you to please complete and let us know how we did today. And if there's anything else that we can answer for you. But we do have a few more moments before we turn it over to Ingleside if anybody wants to write in. But Petra, what we'll do is we're going to turn it back over to Kirsten, to say a few words. But if anyone wants to write in the chat section in the meantime, I'll be here for a few more minutes.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's always great for me even to participate in your educational events and just the refresher that it is. And I always end up learning something new. The only thing I want to share with you all is just, again, that we've got a educational event. Our next one is in 2 weeks. So I want to just share that information with you. And I'll put the link for registering for that in the chat, so that you're able to click there and do that. And then, of course, like Jennifer said, we still have a few minutes. So if there are any other questions, of course, we'd be happy to answer those. And Jennifer, if there's anything that you want to say about the educational event next month, I know that you will be the one that's delivering that to us.
Next month, it's going to just be all about really specifics about the stages for Alzheimer's disease. So, and even if your loved one has another dementia, it'll definitely be beneficial just to hear how somebody progresses through the stages. So we're going to get more detail about the Ireland, the Italy, and the Yemen, and what you're going to experience and how to prepare yourself for caregiving with a loved one as they're going through all these challenging stages.
Yeah, and I think maybe something that's helpful to understand, especially if you've heard dementia and Alzheimer's interchangeably, which I think so many have, and even I think many providers, even physicians might do that, where they use dementia and Alzheimer's interchangeably. Just the kind of clarification that dementia would be an umbrella term for specific types of diseases, Alzheimer's being one of those diseases. So we'll go a little bit more in depth, as Jennifer said, looking specifically at Alzheimer's.
We have a couple of questions. I'm going to wrap up on those and then turn it back over to Kirsten. Judith is asking, is there going to be an outline of today's program online? No, there won't, but there is a recording that I believe, right, Kirsten?
We can send out, absolutely.
Yeah. And then Judith, a different Judith asks, is it beneficial to recommend to spouse for him to read about frontotemporal dementia when it's not obvious at this stage? Are you saying, Judith, that your spouse has frontotemporal dementia, but just doesn't realize it? I'm a little confused about what you're asking. And if that is what you're saying, if your loved one does have frontotemporal dementia, I think that it depends on him. A lot of people want to learn and want to read about it, and some people just aren't comfortable. For family caregivers, I think it's really important for people who are going to be involved in care to learn about it. Another book that I really like is, I'm going to put it in the chat section, and this one is about frontotemporal dementia, Where the Light Gets In by Kimberly Williams Paisley. And I really like that book. It's about, she's an actor and her husband is the country star Brad Paisley. It's a great book, I think, especially for spouses, but also for adult kids. It talks about their journey, and it's really well written, and it's specifically about a subtype of frontotemporal dementia. But Judith, I think really it depends on if your spouse is open to it. Ken is asking for the link to register for 4/7. Kirsten, or are you going to email that out?
Yeah, I can also email it out, and it is in the chat.
It's well, can you put it back in, because there's been a lot of links put in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. All right, well, everybody, thank you so much, and I sure hope there's that link for Ken and anybody who would like to go ahead and connect with us. So we hope to see you on April 7th, and I'm going to turn it over to Petra to wrap us up. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you, Ingleside, for sponsoring today's program, and thanks for everyone for joining us today. Please stay tuned for a link after the program and complete a short survey to tell us how we did. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Bye.